doesn't look like it.
It's Talister.
Life's but a walking shadow. Honor, love, friends, but in their stead, curses.
Hello and welcome to this video as a revision guide for Shakespeare's Macbeth. Today's key character is one of the lesser known ones. This is Malcolm then and his brother Donalbain. They come from Forres, which is Duncan's castle, shown with the arrow somewhere near the north of Scotland. As normal, we're going to look at AO1, understanding what the play is about, and AO2, its language, its form, and indeed its structure. You can see the levels there are outlined to you. Level 5, which is your grade 7 through 9. The level 3, which is round about a grade 5. And level 1, which is your grade 4, 3, 2, and 1. To get that past grade, you need to engage in the themes of the play, as well as begin to analyse the language, zoom in on those individual details and quotes, and indeed the personality and character of the main players on stage. Here then is the hierarchy of Scotland at the time. Duncan at the top as King of Scotland at the start of the play, and right below him are his two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain. Malcolm is the older of the two, so he's the one most likely to inherit the crown. When looking at any characters in Macbeth, it's always a good idea to study the Great Chain of Being. If you don't know what that is, please pause the screen now and make some notes. Malcolm is prince, and so just below there, kings outlined in red. Malcolm is a prince and so of high standing. Being a prince did not necessarily mean you'd get the crown, but there's probably a good chance that your dad would let you when he retires. As with any of the characters, although you're not assessed for context, it's a good idea to know a little bit about their background, just because it helps you add and explain to your explanations of quotes or plot points. The real Malcolm, the dishy guy on the right there, was son of Duncan and did retake the crown after Macbeth, so those events are true. He was known as a Canmore, or a great chief. He had a very long rule and once one of the greatest Scottish kings, staying on the throne for 35 years. Really unusual in 14th century, in the medieval 14th century. Most people only lived maybe to the age of 40, maybe at most the age of 50, 55. So to be on the throne for 35 years really is an achievement. Yet to say he was King of Scotland is misleading, as by then Norway had taken parts of Scotland and held it under Scandinavian rule. So Malcolm didn't rule Scotland as we know it. He owned or ruled only a fraction of what is currently known as Scotland. The real Malcolm was only a child when his father died. Malcolm and his relatives tried many times to beat Macbeth and eventually succeeded. However, it was not Malcolm himself who led the battle, as he was only 9 years old at the time. So you can see there that Malcolm did try and take the throne on multiple occasions, but it was only on the final occasion that eventually he managed to win the throne back. But he was 9 at the time, so how aware Malcolm actually was is probably up for debate. The play obviously accelerates that. Malcolm's a man in the play, and so able to be a bit of a tactician and work out how best to beat Macbeth. Malcolm's lineage can be traced all the way back to our own royal family, as can Banquo's. So there is no killing of Malcolm to let Fleance take the throne. Their descendants both become king. At some point then, Banquo's family must have married into Malcolm's, which meant their sons or daughters eventually had the throne. Thereby then, the play is a much shorter version of history than the real life one was. As normal, it's always a good idea to try and link our main characters to the themes you could be asked about in the test. So yes, Malcolm does have power. He does become king by the end. He shows a different form of power as well to Duncan and Macbeth. He is ambitious, but more ambitious for his country rather than for personal gain. He isn't particularly supernatural. He does use violence to get what he wants. And time is kind of skewed here. The theme of time is greatly accelerated as Malcolm rapidly matures to take the throne. Some keywords to describe the character then, to use to link to quotes later. He's supportive and empowering, insightful, respectful, trusting, thoughtful and sorrowful. You can see quotes underneath there to use when linking to these keywords in red. Why does Shakespeare want us to remember Malcolm? Well, it's Duncan's son Malcolm who leads the English army and, by the end of the play, becomes king. What do we find out about Malcolm through the choice of words other characters seem to use about him? He's eldest, he has signs of nobleness, and he appears good. Shakespeare deliberately makes Malcolm a good, strong king that has many of Duncan's attributes but none of his weaknesses. Malcolm is, at the start of the play, suggested to show signs of nobleness and matures throughout the play before becoming king. He isn't as innocent and pure as Duncan, learning from his father's too trusting nature. Duncan, we remember, really trusts the Thane of Cawdor, but then is betrayed by him to the point where Macbeth has to go and kill him. Then he turns his attentions on Macbeth. Duncan really trusts Macbeth and is again let down by this new Thane of Cawdor. Ultimately, Malcolm is not going to make the same mistakes. He is far less trusting of even his closest advisors and tests them to make sure they're worthy of his trust. What does Malcolm represent? Malcolm represents what it is to be a right and noble king. He represents honour and maturity. He represents the true use of power and ambition by leading by example. And in many ways, Malcolm represents the quality it takes to be a true king, unlike the idealistic Duncan. We're now going to look at individual scenes or acts where Malcolm is prominent. So the first is Act 1, Scene 4. Malcolm informs Duncan that Thane of Cawdor is dead. Duncan is overjoyed at this news and invites his closest friends to watch as he gives his son, Malcolm, the title of Prince of Cumberland. Macbeth begins to plan the death of Duncan as he was expecting to be named as Duncan's successor. After all, it was Macbeth that won the battle for him, not Malcolm, who kind of hung around in the background instead. Let's join this scene then and watch how this will play out on the stage.
Is execution done on Cawdor? I have spoken with one that saw him die, who did report that very frankly he confessed his treasons, implored your highness' pardon, and set forth a deep repentance. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. He died as one who had been studied in his death, to throw away the dearest thing he owed as 'twere a careless trifle.
There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. Oh, worthiest cousin, Macbeth! 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 The sin of my ingratitude even now is heavy on me. Thou art so far before that swiftest wing of recompense is slow to overtake thee. Only I have left to say, more is thy due than more than all can pay.
The service and the loyalty I owe in doing it pays itself. Your highness' part is to receive our duties, and our duties are to your throne and state, children, and servants, which do but what they should by doing everything safe to all your love and honor.
Welcome hither. I have begun to plant thee, and will labour to make thee full of growing. noble Banquo, that is no less deserved, nor must be known no less to have done so. Let me enfold thee and hold thee to my heart.
There, if I grow, the harvest is your own.
My plenteous joys, wanton in fullness, seek to hide themselves in drops of sorrow. Sons, kinsmen, thanes, and you whose places are the nearest, know we will establish our estate upon our eldest, Malcolm, whom we name hereafter the Prince of Cumberland, which honour must not unaccompanied invest him only, but signs of nobleness like stars shall shine on all deservers. From hence to Inverness, and lodge this night with our beloved Macbeth.
I'll be myself the harbinger and make joyful the hearing of my wife. With your approach,
My worthy Cawdor,
so humbly take my leave. The Prince of Cumberland. That is a step on which I must fall down, or else fall deep. For in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires.
As you can see then, Macbeth, slightly annoyed at the fact he was not named Duncan's successor, and sees Malcolm as a hurdle which he must o'erleap. Let's join the play itself then by studying some key extracts from the play and a bit of analysis. You can see some keywords down the right-hand side to kind of guide your writing. Macbeth then comes into this scene being portrayed as a humble, loyal servant to Duncan, using flattery and humble attitude to appear totally committed to his ruler, Duncan. Duncan implies to us that he sees Macbeth as a man who will grow into a great man over time. This emphasises his godliness and his patience to let Macbeth mature into a man who could be king one day. Duncan contrasts the suggestion that Macbeth is immature with the reference to Banquo being noble and held thee to my heart. Shakespeare implies that Macbeth may be jealous of the affection that Duncan shows Banquo. Shakespeare contrasts Banquo with Macbeth, as Banquo thanks Duncan for his kind words, unlike the silent Macbeth. Shakespeare confronts us with a king who feels pride in awarding his son the highest honour. His sense of family and kinship is clear, as he wants his friends to witness the proud moment that Malcolm is made prince. The absence of the reason for this gives Macbeth motivation to feel unfairly treated. After all, why does Malcolm deserve this honour when Macbeth doesn't? Shakespeare challenges us to see Malcolm as a man who has the beginnings of the qualities that make a king, yet, like Macbeth and Banquo, he is not ready to take this responsibility. To Duncan, Malcolm is a star, a hope for the future. Some key quotes then from this scene that you could use in your response. Let's rejoin the play at Act 2, Scene 3. Macduff discovers the body of Duncan. Macduff wakes everyone up and Macbeth kills the servants in a rage as he wants everyone to think that they are to blame. Everyone is shaken as what happened and Lady Macbeth faints. Malcolm and Donalbain are uneasy about what happened and don't really believe what they're hearing. Malcolm and Donalbain fear for their lives and decide to run away. Malcolm goes to England, Donalbain goes to Ireland. Malcolm and Donalbain is almost seen as cowardly here, as rather than kingly. They are almost immediately suspicious of Macbeth, which shows their intellect but not their courage. Malcolm is not ready to be king yet.
What is amiss? You are, and you do not know it. Spring, the head, the fountain of your blood is stopped. The very source of it is stopped.
Your royal father's murdered.
By whom? Those of his chamber, as it seemed, had done it. Their hands and faces were all badged with blood. So were the daggers which we found upon their pillows. They stared and were distracted. No man's life was to be trusted with them.
Oh, yes, I do repent to me of my fear in that I did kill them.
Well, what did you sow?
Who can be wise, amazed?
Temperate and furious, loyal and neutral in a moment.
No man.
The expedition of my violent love outran the pauser, reach up. Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood. Where his gashed stabs looked like a breach in nature from Ruin's wasteful entrance. They're the murderers, steeped in the colours of their trade, their daggers unmannerly breached with gore. Who could refrain that had a heart to love, and in that heart courage to make his love known?
Oh, help my hands. Oh.
Look to the lady.
Oh.
Why do we hold our tongues that most may claim this argument for ours?
What should be spoken here, where our fate hid in an auger hole may rush and seize us thence away? Our tears are not yet brewed,
Nor our strong sorrow on the foot of motion. And when we have our naked frailties hid that suffer in exposure, let us meet and question this most bloody piece of work to know it further. Fears and scruples shake us. In the great hand of God I stand, and thence against the undivulged pretense I fight, of treasonous malice.
And so do I.
So all. Let's briefly put on manly readiness, and meet in the hall together. Well contented. What will you do? Let's not consort with them. To show an unfelt sorrow is an office which the false man does easy. I'll to England.
To Ireland, our separated fortune shall keep us both the safer. Where we are, there's daggers in men's smiles. The nearer in blood, the nearer blood.
And our safest way is to avoid the aim, therefore to a horse.
And let us not be dainty of leave taking, but shift away.
There's warrant in that theft which steals itself. Then there's no mercy left.
Shakespeare presents us with Malcolm, who appears emotionally detached from his father, yet is wary and surprisingly logical about the means of his father's death. On one hand, we are greeted with the image of an uncaring son, yet we're also able to see a leader who can look past personal emotion to the bigger picture. Shakespeare makes clear the unification of Britain here, as Donalbain chooses Ireland and England goes to Malcolm. The country his sons are destined to rule. His reference to daggers here makes clear the natural intelligence that both kings' sons have. Once again, Shakespeare repeats the language used in earlier scenes. Shakespeare forces us to see that Malcolm seems that it was a soldier that killed his father. He repeatedly uses terminology of a soldier and a war rather than politics, the more obvious reason for Macbeth's death. Some key quotes then from this scene. Act 4, Scene 3. In England, Macduff and Malcolm discuss if they should help each other to fight against Macbeth. Malcolm thinks Macduff is an agent of Macbeth. Macduff is shocked and Malcolm tells him his vices are far worse than Macbeth's. Malcolm tells him it was a test and he was lying to him, and that Macduff is a patriot wanting the best for Scotland. Malcolm makes clear his actual qualities and says he's ready to invade Scotland. The Doctor tells Malcolm about King Edward's healing touch. Malcolm says this quality is passed down to future kings. Macduff learns of his family's death, and Malcolm says the time is right to invade as Macbeth is against heaven. Malcolm deliberately models the virtues of a wise and clever king. He tests Macduff rather than trusts him immediately. Shakespeare deliberately contrasts this static scene with supernatural and violent scenes before and after it. Shakespeare presents us with a Malcolm who's crying for Scotland, emphasising his sadness over Scotland, beginning to make clear his kingly qualities. Shakespeare presents us with an angry and defiant Macduff, who is beyond words and wants action, exaggerating his warlike background with a lack of finesse with conversation. New is repeated here to emphasise how Scotland is now reborn in Macbeth's shadow. Heaven is personified, and we're given the image of Macbeth literally striking heaven with his evil. Malcolm makes clear that he does not trust Macduff, as Macbeth did not hurt him yet. There is dramatic irony here, as we've just witnessed the slaughter of Macduff's family in the previous scene. Malcolm compares himself to a lamb, as if Macduff might be about to trick him and sacrifice him to a new angry god, Macbeth. Macduff is contrasted with Malcolm here with short, simple sentences to emphasise that he's not guilty of betraying Scotland. Malcolm follows this with, "But Macbeth is," making clear Malcolm's superior intellect to Macduff. Shakespeare allows us to reflect on Macduff speaking for Scotland. His use of alliteration and clear links to hell emphasise Macduff's loathing and hatred for Macbeth, even before he finds out about his wife's death. Shakespeare forces us to reflect on the qualities of a king, giving an overlong list of adjectives to illustrate the worst qualities of Macbeth, juxtaposing them with Malcolm, Macduff and Duncan. However, Malcolm makes clear he is worse than Macbeth, as he has the sin of lust and could have any woman, even Macduff's own relatives. So Malcolm here is deliberately making clear all horrible qualities of Macbeth, and then actually saying that he's even worse because he has the sin of lust. Shakespeare allows us to see Macduff is forgiving, as he's willing to let Malcolm have his way with the women of Scotland, rather than let Macbeth stay in power. This emphasises his hatred for Macbeth and what he's done to his country. Shakespeare makes us imagine Macbeth as a vulture preying on the rotting corpse of Scotland, picking over the remains of the country he killed. Shakespeare presents us with a list of virtues that are becoming of a king, an asyndetic list of endless qualities. Shakespeare parallels Macbeth's own speech here in Act 4, Scene 1, where all of the earth should fall to his ambition. Shakespeare presents us with Macduff's goodness. If Malcolm's lies are true, then Macduff will kill him. Shakespeare presents us with a reminder of Malcolm's lineage. He is the son of a sainted king. Shakespeare presents us with Malcolm's cunning, as, unlike his father, Malcolm isn't willing to simply trust Macduff and reveal it with a test that he is tricked before Macbeth by Macbeth's servants. Now we know then that according to this, Macbeth has sent many minions to hunt out Malcolm and either kill him or trick him. Malcolm knows that this has been going on and so has devised this test to prove who he can trust and who he can't. Shakespeare presents us with a pure king who is untainted and innocent. Shakespeare also makes clear that Malcolm believes in God and is willing to serve his country above all else. The boy has matured and is now a man. The grandness of the speech and the hyperbolizing of Malcolm's virtues exaggerate his fitness and ability to be king in a play filled with imperfection. Malcolm embodies the notion of a true king of Scotland. In this scene, Malcolm makes clear his ties with England. Edward lends his support to Malcolm to strengthen the ties to Scotland that lead ultimately to the King of Scotland becoming King of England, King James. Malcolm looks at Edward as a saint. Remember, Edward is the current King of England at the time. He believes that Edward can heal by his very touch. This clearly links to Jesus and the King being a voice of God. He then says the gift of healing will pass on to future kings. As you can see in the black box there, we've got words like gracious England, come we go to the king, and good king, all describing the King of England. Now we know Malcolm's ancestors will go on to rule England, so it makes sense that Shakespeare would want to use frequent links to King Edward to make sure the ties to England and Scotland are really, really clear and really, really positive. What do we learn from this scene? Well, we have some key quotes there you could use in your answer. Please make a note of these and maybe some brainstorms around them based on the notes you've just made. Act 5, Scene 9. Malcolm wants to know if all his troops are back safely. Malcolm rewards his soldiers for their bravery, making them earls. And Malcolm invites everyone to his coronation at Scone.
Enter, sir, the castle.
I would the friends we lack were safe arrived. Macduff is missing.
Hail, King, for so thou art. The time is free. Hail, King of Scotland.
Hail, King of Scotland.
We shall not spend a large expense of time before we reckon with your several loves and make us even with you. What's more to do? As calling home our exiled friends abroad that fled the snares of watchful tyranny, producing forth the cruel ministers of this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen, who 'tis thought by self and violent hands took off her life. This, and what needful else that calls upon us by the grace of grace, we shall perform in measure, time, and place. So thanks to all, at once, and to each one, whom we invite to see us crowned at Scone.
There we have then Malcolm finally becoming king and realising his potential. Now I said there in red that it seemed this is often portrayed as quite a happy sense of victory for the good and happy king and the future for Scotland. But in this particular version you've just watched, it seems strangely sombre and sad. It seems like all of them are reflecting on the number of deaths it's taken to get here and how this version of reality or this alternative timeline should never really have happened. Macbeth should not ever have become king. And so every character is kind of reflecting on what awful things happened during his brief reign before Malcolm resumes the correct chain of being. Shakespeare echoes the scene at the start with Duncan rewarding his thanes with titles. Malcolm makes clear this is a new start for Scotland, referring to the natural imagery often used by Duncan and Banquo near the beginning of the play. Scotland will grow again. Shakespeare invites us to contrast the hero of Macbeth at the start with the role he had in his death, a butcher. Shakespeare allows us to reflect on the pain that Scotland has suffered and juxtaposes this with Malcolm's role as the new father of Scotland. Malcolm knows that it will take time to heal this country. The wounds that Macbeth has inflicted will not disappear overnight. By the end of the play then, what does Shakespeare want us to think? Shakespeare presents Malcolm as a young man learning to be a good king. It can be argued that Malcolm changes the most in the play, as he slowly evolves from a scared child into a king that could better his sainted father. Unlike Duncan, Malcolm isn't trusting and is willing to test even his most loyal men to prove that they are worthy. I'm now going to show you then, for each part of the play, 3 quotes you can use with at least grade 5 answers written underneath. Please make notes and then try and write them from memory. And now we're going to move then on to essay skills, the part of the video then that talks you through how to use this information in a written response in exam conditions. As normal for any Macbeth question, for 1A or indeed 1B, you start by writing a short overview, saying why this scene's important. Then you write about start of the extract or start of the play, then what's changed by the middle of the extract or middle of the play, and then what's changed by the end of the play or indeed the end of the extract. Now, as you can see, when we start looking closely at the marking criteria, one of the things you've got to look at is structure. That is how the lines are formed or indeed how characters change. This is part of the exam criteria that many students completely miss out. They focus just on the language being used, the words being used by the characters, without thinking about the order of those words or how they're being presented. Now, here's an extract you can see on the board, and you're just about to hear that being read out. Our key question today then is, how does Shakespeare suggest what it takes to be king? Now, in blue, I've outlined all the possible things you could talk about when referring to structure. So we've got any repetition being used, the way a relationship or character or theme evolves through the extract, any enjambment being used, that is how lines are cut up in certain places and why Shakespeare chose to cut them in those places. After all, Shakespeare doesn't write in paragraphs. Any reference to rhythm or lack of rhythm, the rhyming of the work, if it rhymes or doesn't rhyme, and the types of sentences being used. Are they commands, statements, or overly descriptive, or even a list, etc.? As you hear this extract then, try and think about any of these features you could talk about. Perhaps label them if you were to find a copy of the play and label your own copies.
Perchance even there where I did find my doubts, Why in that rawness left you wife and child? Those precious motives, those strong knots of love, without leave-taking. I pray you, let not my jealousies be your dishonours, but mine own safeties. You may be rightly just, whatever I shall think.
Bleed, bleed, poor country. Great tyranny, lay thou thy basis sure, for goodness dare not check thee. Wear thou thy wrongs, the title is afeard. Fare thee well, lord. I would not be the villain that thou think'st, for the whole space that's in the tyrant's grasp, and the rich east took'n't.
Be not offended. I speak not as in absolute fear of you. I think our country sinks beneath the yoke. It weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wounds. I think withal there would be hands uplifted in my right. And here from gracious England have I offered of goodly thousands. But for all this, when I shall tread upon the tyrant's head or wear it on my sword, yet my poor country shall have more vices than it had before, more subtle in more sundry ways than ever, by him that shall succeed.
Now, as you can see, there's lots of words there that link to murder or death, quite a few that personify Scotland, but equally there's also quite a range of punctuation in there. There's some interesting choices of enjambment, and you can see that Malcolm is trying to pacify Macduff and make him calm down and talk to him more rationally, showing some of his king-like qualities. So let's break this down then. Today I'm just going to focus on structure and pretty much ignore some of the language being used, although equally there could be some good points made. I'm taking the extract into three pieces then, apart into three pieces. The part on the board currently then is what I might term the beginning of the extract. I need to think about who Malcolm is talking to and why, and what are Malcolm's motives at this moment. When we know the scene comes from about halfway through the play, and Malcolm is talking to Macduff. Macduff at this point is hating Macbeth, but may or may not know that his own family have been killed by him. Malcolm's aim is to make sure then that Macduff can be trusted, and equally, if he can be trusted, he should then try and secure his help in ridding Scotland of Macbeth. Malcolm's aim then is to persuade Macduff, but he does so cautiously, making sure he can be trusted first. Now, when we start looking at the structure of what Malcolm says, we immediately notice his first sentence is a statement. Now, what impression do we get from that? Well, somebody who's confident, somebody who knows what they're talking about, and equally somebody who wants to be in control of the situation, perhaps all of which could be termed as kingly qualities. Shakespeare is using enjambment after the word child, and later after the word love. What does he want Macduff to be thinking here? Well, he clearly wants him to reflect on his own family and the feelings he has for them. In this case, he's questioning why Macduff left his wife and child. This perhaps then tells us that Malcolm really cares about family and those that are closest to him. He isn't so worried then about whole armies. He's a very personal man. He's a leader who cares about his soldiers and cares about their mental health. We also can look at the kind of words Malcolm's using. What words is Malcolm saying about Macduff through his word choices? What does he say about himself? So can we find any connections between different words being used? Well, he asks Macduff to pray, and he says that you may be rightly just. Both of these show a level of respect between Malcolm and Macduff. He seems to then exaggerate his respect of Macduff to make sure then that Macduff trusts him. Unlike Macbeth, Lady Macbeth and the witches, there is no clever wordplay or rhyming here. Why not? Well, Malcolm is much more straightforward. He isn't trying to manipulate Macduff. He is simply just trying to make him reflect on his own life and perhaps empathise with him. So on that link, you could actually say that Malcolm is being more genuine than other characters, which in turn might make him a better leader or ruler later on. If I was writing up these ideas then, based solely on structure, this is how my answer would look. I've got my opening paragraph, a short four lines or so at the start there, giving an overview of the whole extract. And then I start looking at individual parts of the extract itself. As you can see on the board there, that's my first 2 paragraphs where I've got my intro and then my notes or my full sentence answer based on the start of the extract. Good practice, again, to learn more about Malcolm would be to make some notes based on what you see in front of you and then try and recreate this paragraph from memory, then comparing it back with the example that's on the board. Now we need to look at the middle of the extract, in this case, Macduff speaking. As the extract develops, it's a good way of starting, because it shows a bit of structure, how the extract is changing or exaggerating a theme. We see the good Macduff panic, allowing us to compare both good men, because after all, Macduff and Malcolm are both good men, and see perhaps why Shakespeare allows Malcolm to be king rather than Macduff. I've then given you some sentence starters to help you explain this part of the extract. So first of all, I'm asking you to look at the repetition. What is being repeated and perhaps why? Why are there exclamation marks being used? What does that say about Macduff's mood? Macduff is respectful with the statement, "Fare thee well, Lord," which makes us feel what about his relationship to Malcolm? The enjambment, wrongs and grasp suggests Macduff feels, and Shakespeare does this as he wants us to. Now, as you look through that and begin filling in the gaps, look at how often I'm mentioning Shakespeare. Look at how often I'm mentioning the word reader or a link to the reader through we or us. And each one of these I'd want to explain as much detail as I can. Remember, you're not under exam conditions now, so there's no need to try and rush it. Think, can I say more than a sentence about those points? Can I explain them using a simple connective such as because? If so, more marks could be awarded. And then we've got the conclusion of the extract. Malcolm uses repeated imagery here, linked to war as. Shakespeare is using enjambment here as. And Shakespeare makes Malcolm's anger grow at the end by using alliteration or sibilance, which challenges us to see him as. Put those together and that gives you an ending to your mock response. If I was answering a 1B question then, this might be the essay structure I use. How does Shakespeare suggest what it takes to be king in the whole play? Well, immediately you've got several characters who become king: Duncan, Malcolm, and of course Macbeth. So my short overview might do a summary of each one of those, thinking, in my opinion, who is the best king, who is the worst, and potentially why. Then I'd cover the start of the play. What does Duncan do, say, or think at this point? What quotes can I find to justify that? What has changed by the middle of the play? How does Macbeth's style of leadership tell us that he's a very different kind of king to his predecessor? How then is Macbeth different from Duncan? And by the end of the play, of course, we've got Macbeth's leadership and what it leads to. How does this contrast with Malcolm? And how does Shakespeare let us know that Malcolm is an improvement over both previous kings? If you can answer these questions then, using quotes, using some of the structural devices I've just highlighted, this would give you an essay-style response then to a question based on what it takes to be a king. Thank you very much then for listening to this video, this revision video for Malcolm, linked to the Shakespeare text, Macbeth.